Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am Jack Chambers Ward, I am your host as usual, and I'm joined this week by the fantastic Patrick Hathaway from Sitebulb. That's right, Patrick is making his return to the show after 4 years. That's right, he was back here in 2020. Well, he wasn't here in the studio, he was on the podcast 4 years ago with Mark talking all about Sitebulb. And Patrick makes his triumphant return this week, talking all about Sitebulb's latest study into JavaScript. More specifically, it's into the JavaScript and kind of how we understand it in the SEO industry. It's a fantastic study and survey of a multitude of SEO professionals across the industry and basically understanding what we know about JavaScript, how many people know about JavaScript, and what we're going to kind of admit to knowing. How many people think they know what they know, and how many people don't know what they don't know. It'll make much more sense in a minute, I promise. But yes, like I said, this is not sponsored by Sitebulb or anything like that. I'm just having Patrick back on the show because I think it's a really, really cool study. They're not paying us. They're not anything like that. This is an unbiased interview, unbiased opinion, all that kind of thing. And of course, I will get into links and stuff later on, but there will be a link for the full study straight away below me here. You'll see it across the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Check the video description, check the links in Spotify and whatever podcast app you're listening on. You can go and check it out in the show notes below as well. Of course, read along with us, all that kind of stuff. We'll dive into some of the takes and stuff like that from Patrick's analysis and his feedback and some of the amazing SEO professionals they've got to give their insights into the data along the way, including former guests of the show like Arnaud Hellmans and Aleda Solis, breaking it down and giving more information about JavaScript and how they feel the industry is. And we basically get into my experience with JavaScript, my little bit of experience, and Patrick's experience with it from the side of Sitebulb as well, and bringing all that data together, including the feedback from a lot of the SEO industry. And it's a really interesting study. And I think you'll have a really good time watching or listening to me and Patrick chat about this for the next 40-ish minutes or so. I think it's a really interesting way to dive in and pull apart that data, and actually having Patrick on the show to ask questions to and get his thoughts and opinions on it has been really, really great as well. Before I get to my conversation with Patrick, of course, I'd like to say a huge thank you and go to this week's sponsors, which are right now. The first sponsor for this week's episode is AlsoAsked. You can go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic and unique intent research tool. As we probably already know, search intent is at the core of everything we do as SEOs. Even if you're not directly working in content, understanding what your users are trying to achieve through their searches is still pretty important. I think we can all agree. On top of this, Google has told us that it takes up to 9 searches for users to complete their goals. This can be a pretty hard picture to capture, to be honest, with traditional keyword research tools. So what if you could get hold of up-to-the-minute questions that users have asked that have been clustered by intent by Google themselves? Well, that's exactly what AlsoAsked actually does. AlsoAsked mines and organizes Google's People AlsoAsked data in real time, showing you the next most likely question your searchers are going to ask. Best of all, it's completely free. You don't even need to create an account to try out AlsoAsked. Of course, if you do find it useful, there are paid options as well. We have the free, we have the light, and we have the pro options in terms of accounts that you can subscribe to. At the touch of a button from these accounts, you can download not only the questions people are asking, but also the answers Google has selected, the website URLs, and the titles that are ranking for those answers as well. AlsoAsked has the world's only API for People AlsoAsked data, meaning you can combine this data you're pulling from whatever questions you're asking directly into tools. You can combine it with things like ChatGPT to really supercharge your content briefs and transform the way you write content at scale. Go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic intent research tool today. Our next sponsor is Core Updates. That is the latest newsletter from the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. You may know Mark from his unsolicited SEO tips and his appearances on this very show. He started this podcast, in fact, and is going to be my co-host every single month on our monthly news recap episodes. But if you just want a bit more Mark, you want all of his unsolicited SEO tips, get them actually solicited directly to your inbox every single week. You get the latest episode of this podcast. You get all of the latest SEO news and articles that Mark has selected and thinks are the things you should be paying attention to. All of that delivered to your inbox every single Monday. So if you want to get, like I said, Mark's usual recaps and stuff, it is one of the best places to go for the latest SEO news and pretty much what you can expect from the best in the industry when it comes to the articles and news that is going on, any updates from Google and all that kind of stuff. Go to coreupdates.com and sign up today to get SEO news, brand new episodes of this very podcast, and Mark's SEO tips delivered straight to your inbox. Coreupdates.com is the place to go. My guest for this week is the co-founder and CEO of Sitebulb and is making his return to the podcast for over 4 years. That was back in July of 2020. Welcome back to the show, Patrick Hathaway.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming back on. And like I was saying to you just before we start recording, you're one of the few people who has been hosted by both me and Mark on Search with Canada. So you're in somewhat rarefied SEO podcast air there, I feel.
Very nice. Yeah. I mean, the last one, I think we talked a lot about how Sitebulb kind of came to be. So yeah, there was a lot's changed, I suppose, since then.
I'll put a link in the show notes, listeners and viewers, if you do want to go and check out Mark and Patrick talking about that. If you want to learn more about Sitebulb, that is probably the better episode to get into the nitty-gritty and the details and stuff like that. I know Sitebulb is a thing we have been using at Canada for a very long time. It is in our daily rotation as part of our toolkit and all that kind of stuff. You guys are not sponsoring this episode. There is nothing to do with that. You're not paying me to say any of that stuff. Blah, 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 all the official legal stuff I have to say. It's just nice to have you on. And we have a very interesting topic because I was speaking to you and Jojo a little while ago about this amazing JavaScript SEO study you guys have done and the report coming out of that as well. And I think it's a really interesting thing. It is launching today, if you're watching or listening, on Monday, the 5th of August. So it's available now. Like I said, links in the show notes. You can go and read the report along with us having a conversation. And Patrick, I guess I'll hand over to you and kind of kick things off with what was the inspiration for conducting this study? What is this study and what were the kind of like thoughts behind it?
Yeah, so the study itself is based on a survey we've done about sort of the understanding within the industry about JavaScript and rendering and how it affects websites and in particular how it affects sort of search engine results and all that sort of stuff. And the inspiration from it really was a bit of a, we kind of stumbled upon it being something we thought we needed to do as a result of a few things towards the end of last year when we were sort of, collecting some regular user feedback like we do for Sitebulb all the time, when a couple of our, I suppose I'd call them power users, Aleda, who everybody knows, and Arnout Hellemans, who a lot of people know as well.
Arnout's been on the show before.
Arnout's on the show. There you go. Yeah, but I mean, both of them really extremely generous with their time and have at many points over the years made suggestions to us about things that they think we should add. And, we take that kind of feedback seriously. And what they were both telling us at this point in time was that the sort of response versus render report, which we have in Sitebulb, or had in Sitebulb at the time already, which kind of helps you understand the difference between the HTML response and, what rendered HTML looks like, which we can dig into a little bit more later, that we were missing a few bits, and there were certain things that they were seeing that Sitebulb could probably do a better job of reporting on. And so we went back and we rebuilt that report, and we thought, we tried to answer all of those questions. How do we help show these specific things? And having done that towards the end of last year, at the start of this year, we thought, well, what other sort of helpful content can we put out there, to help people understand this stuff? And so we arranged a webinar, and we got both Aleda and Arnout on, and we also got Sam Torres, who from the Grey Dot Company, who is just an absolute genius at this stuff. And we had a really, really good webinar that we talked about everything to do with JavaScript. And we had like 500 people register for this thing. And so we were like, okay, well, this is a topic that people are interested in and they want to know more about. And so it kind of grew from there, like us going, okay, this is probably something. There's probably something in this that we should look into a little bit further. Like, people want to learn more about it, right? And so it was at that point that we thought might be interesting, I suppose, to try and get a gauge of where the industry is and what things they're struggling with. And so, yeah, the survey itself forms, well, the sort of report, I suppose, forms two parts. There's the survey, which is kind of the user data, how people think about JavaScript and what they feel they know about it. And we also have some Sitebulb data in there as well. So there's various data points that we collect in terms of how people are using the tool, and it's, are they crawling with our HTML crawler or are they crawling with our Chrome crawler, right? Are they using JavaScript rendering or not? And the patterns that you'll see in the report just show, essentially a shift over time, which is reasonably gradual, but then just getting more and more further apart, where everybody now is looking at JavaScript rendering. So again, all this stuff's in the report, so you can go and have a look at it all there. But so we thought there might be a narrative here. We did the study. We think there's some really interesting points in there, and that's where it all came from.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thought process of kind of picking apart, like you said, where some of the kind of gaps are in a lot of the conversations that are happening in the industry, the education, and that's something I was talking about with Nikki Pilkington a couple of weeks ago, like these good, great, amazing resources. Aleda being a perfect example. LearningSEO.io is like an amazing resource for all these kind of things. And obviously Mark has his own course. There's loads of courses out there you can learn SEO from. But JavaScript for me has always been almost like the unspoken, like, yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, I know ish what it does. Like, funny enough, I was literally having a conversation with an account manager at Canada the other day, and we found one of our client sites where the main nav wasn't working when you disable JavaScript on Chrome. And he was like, is it kind of like where it does all the like moving bits and like sparkly bits and stuff? I'm like, kind of, yeah, yeah. Without me digging into details and not taking up the next half an hour of your time, yes, essentially, kind of. and I think it was an interesting thing where, like you said, you bring on people like Aleda and Sam and Arnout and have these real experts talking about it, and then realize there's a hunger for this kind of thing, right? And I am totally one of these people who, I've been in the SEO world now for 6-7 years or so, but technical SEO has never been my strongest point, and I think JavaScript is something we can all learn a lot more about. And I think it's, like you said, the data you guys have got from the increase in people using the Chrome crawler compared to the HTML crawler speaks to growth of JavaScript being used in the web over the last decade or so, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if we were 10 years back, most developers would probably say they just use a bit of jQuery here and there, and that's sort of it. And like, the release of certain frameworks has allowed developers to do so much more. You can control the front end and the back end with one language now. You can write full scale web apps. You can do mobile apps as well, all with JavaScript. And the development of these frameworks, again, without getting into all of like what are all these things, but there'll be frameworks that most SEOs will have heard of by now. Node, JavaScript, Angular, all of these languages, these frameworks that have become more accessible over time and have now got like the open source community behind them as well. And like as technologies, trying to keep pace with this development, we've now got very powerful handhold devices that can manage most complex websites. Every so often you'll go on a website and it won't work very very well, but in general, most of the time they're pretty good. And as that has sort of as that technology's taken off, it really does now power the web. There's not that many websites that have absolutely no dependence on JavaScript, and even the ones that do have like the minimal amount, they're ones that in the next few years probably will get a facelift. They probably will get some of the more whistles and bells that you can do with JavaScript now. So I think over time even that stuff will shift out because JavaScript has become the language of the web, and to some extent HTML is the thing that I expect junior developers coming through probably aren't learning that much so much anymore because they can do everything they need to with JavaScript.
It's interesting. I always like equate it to the like social media and the shift in technology in general. Of like, I think people are now using the term search it or search it up, apparently is what Zoomers are using, instead of Googling it, because obviously Google has been just the search powerhouse for so long now. And people, oldies, no offense, Patrick, like you and me, where we've been around a little bit longer than these Gen Zers around, know all these kind of like, oh yeah, I remember Bebo and Facebook and all this stuff. And like you said, people coming in and learning new technology straight away do not necessarily go back and learn. Why would you go back and learn something from 20 years ago, from 15, 30 years ago in some cases? You come straight in and be like, well, what is the thing that is going to make, me most employable, make me most resourceful, make the most sense for me to learn in 2024 and into the future? JavaScript is it. I think you're totally right. That's a huge part of development now. And speaking to, we had a developer here at Canada who is 10 years younger than me. I'm 33 and he's in his early 20s. And it was fascinating talking to him about his kind of journey of just like, yeah, I started coding when I was like 9. I'm like, I didn't even know that was an option. When I was playing with my like wrestling figures when I was 9. What are you talking about? That blows my mind. And like he was mentioning like being introduced to JavaScript as a teenager. I'm like, God, that feels like another world to me. And I think it's really interesting from your report side of things. A lot of the people who responded are incredibly experienced SEOs. Well, I mentioned I have sort of like 6 or 7 years under my belt, but a lot of the people have 10 plus years. So like really experienced SEOs. And I think the big takeaway for me, and I know you kind of summarized this in your conclusion, is the kind of disparity we see between people saying like, yeah, I understand that crawling and rendering and kind of understanding the process of how JavaScript is used by Google in the indexing and crawling process. How many people have actually read that? How many people actually understand that, have gone off and read the Google documentation or, like I said earlier, done a course and stuff like that? There was quite a bit of disparity between the two. And I think that links into kind of the skills gap kind of thing we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think... like when it comes to documentation, like, why should you go off and read what Google say about a thing, right? Like,
it's not the most
because just because they've got it, like it does, and like there's an element of certainly, I think it's better these days, but there has historically been an element of, do we trust what they say anyway, right? So yeah, they say, you say, like there's a big song and dance about called Web Vitals, a few years ago that. As soon as that update came out, it was sort of, actually, is that most sites aren't really impacted by this anyway? And like they pull back on so many things. I think it's really interesting though to like, particularly with JavaScript, because the development of Google's ability to render has shifted dramatically in the last few years. There was so much made of the fact that they for so long they were stuck on a really, really old rendering engine, and loads of things that you built, loads of websites that you built just wouldn't work properly when Google tried to render them. So there was a big anti-JavaScript movement in SEO. Were like, just don't use JavaScript. Like, if you want if you want to be sure about this, just don't use JavaScript. And like a lot of the rhetoric that's come out of Google since they have moved to essentially rendering everything, or at least as they claim, rendering everything that they index, is that no, it's fine now. We can render everything. Don't worry about it. Do whatever you want on websites, and it'll be absolutely fine. And as that has sort of shifted the perspective away from, oh, JavaScript is bad, don't do it at all. Partly what they want us to all think is that JavaScript's completely fine, do whatever you want with it. And so there's a little bit of both going on here. I think there's like some of maybe the older SEOs are like, well, I'm just going to stick to JavaScript is bad, right? And like, let's just stay clear of it, just in case we don't really know. And then maybe the younger SEOs coming through into the industry, like, well, Google say it's fine, let's not worry about it. And like when you look at websites in the browser and everything looks completely fine, you can convince yourself that, oh yeah, that looks good, that looks fine to me. Everything looks good here. And I think the big problem with JavaScript is it's so opaque. It's so difficult to actually know what's happening and when it's happening, the timing of all the things that are happening to get to what you're actually looking at in the browser.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, like I said, the term opaque is a great word for it, where we feel like we can kind of scratch the surface. You can almost see what's going on a page, but actually working out where that is, at what stage of the loading process, what stage of the rendering process is actually going to explain what's happening there, can be an entire day's work of investigating and digging around and all that kind of stuff. And I know you mentioned how much like Google's ability to render and index stuff from what we're displaying through JavaScript has changed over the last few years. I know Mark did a test of this, a specific how long does it take for Google to catch up with the JavaScript compared to the HTML. I think it was 5 years ago. On his blog, he made up a title and then changed the title using JavaScript to see how quickly Google's index would pick up the changes and all that kind of stuff. And it has gotten so much better. Like I said, when I first came into the industry, it was very much like you were saying, don't use JavaScript for anything. Always just trust good old HTML. We know HTML is always going to be there. It's always going to work. Basic HTML crawlers is the way to go. And I think for the most part, that is still the case. Like all of your internal links and your main navigation should probably still be HTML just in case. But I think you're right that we're moving in that direction where, because of Google and other search engines, credit to what Bing has been doing as well, what search engines are now able to do with the abundance of JavaScript, like you were saying, across the web now, it does feel like there is a kind of turning point happening, not just in our industry, but like we said, in web development on the search side of things, from the search engine side of things. And I thought it was really interesting to pull some stats out from the report here. We have over 94% of the respondents say it's important to know how Google crawls, renders, and indexes JavaScript, but for over 41% of them have not read the Google documentation, and only 10% said they fully understood how it actually works. And like I said, I am totally guilty of this. I will hold my hands up and say I don't fully understand how it works. I would not be in that 10%. But like you said, the Google documentation can be pretty dry at times. I think credit to Martin Splitt and what he's been doing with a lot of the videos he's been making. I think he's a really engaging speaker and is able to make JavaScript quite interesting and funny and engaging and stuff like that. But if you're just sat there reading Google documentation and trying to work out like how this actually works, and like I said, I can do the little diagram of like, oh, here's the crawl queue and the rendering queue and that kind of thing. They're very basics, but it can be a pretty dry subject at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, especially when a lot of that stuff is not always aimed at SEOs. It's also aimed at developers, and like that when acronyms and certain language is used, it does alienate people. And it can make you think, well, is this for me? Should I be reading it? Do I understand? They'll throw SSR in there, right? So server-side rendering. You're reading this going, well, if I don't know what SSR is, how am I supposed to actually take this information and digest it properly? But like the idea that people haven't sought it out and gone to read it, I think is interesting for sure. Again, like that's not a criticism, but it is interesting that if pretty much everybody's saying they think it's important, that then haven't also gone to at least see what Google's saying. And I don't know then if that means there's an over-reliance on tools or over-reliance on other signals, Are
you allowed to say that as the CEO of Sitebulb?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think tools very much have their place, and you can't do SEO if you don't use tools, right? Like everybody knows that you can't scale the analysis. But part of the skill set that I think SEOs need to have is the ability to hone in on things and look at things on a page by page basis and start to actually dig into things. And even if that's just an awareness of how DevTools works, what are they showing you? What's within that toolbox? Because that's what developers use, right? if you ever work with a developer on any website project whatsoever, they'll go straight into DevTools. They'll be analyzing how things are loaded and all that sort of stuff. And if that is completely alien to you, that probably is an area that is worth spending some time. I would say if you want to have at least enough knowledge, and this is where I've always said that I don't feel SEOs should learn development. I don't think that they should go as far as being almost good enough to do development. Developers have got their job, SEOs have got their job, but where I think that the role of the SEO is to understand what tools or what they're seeing with themselves within the data, what they're seeing there, what patterns they can spot there, actually being able to communicate that to developers in a way that means that action will be taken, right? And it doesn't have to be, I understand exactly what script's doing what and which is being loaded in, but being able to understand that there's a lot of scripts being loaded in here. Do they all need to be loaded in at this point in time? This is making the page really slow. It's slowing down rendering, right? Those sorts of things, so that you can have a meaningful conversation with the developer. Maybe you're sitting with them and talking them through with it, or at the very least, putting things in front of them saying, this doesn't look right. Could you dig into this a bit further, please? Because it's starting to have an impact here, and here. So yeah, I would certainly advocate, an awareness of what's happening, an ability to investigate things outside of what the tools will tell you, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something, funny enough, that is something Arnaut talked about at his Search Norwich talk last month. He was talking about using free tools and the power of just, I think you used the term, getting your hands dirty, and just actually looking at our website, like you said, using DevTools, using the stuff that is available to you in the browser, and you don't have to go off and, no offense, use Sitebulb or any of the tools straight away. But like you said, as soon as you're working at scale, and I think this is particularly important when you can see what the browser is doing, and then you get a different result in the tool, and then you're suddenly like, aha, there's a pain point here. There is that comparison, that deduction moment where you can work out, okay, so if it's not happening here and I'm running the HTML crawler side of things and it is happening on the browser, hello JavaScript, probably. Let's have a look. Let's dig into that. And like you said, that ability to communicate, translate, and kind of be in that conversation with developers has been, I think, a big part of, especially us working in agencies. A lot of SEOs here working in agencies, and I know a lot of our listeners and viewers work in agencies as well, where they also have developers in-house. We do at Candour, and me having these kind of conversations of, oh, hey, developer, would you mind coming and having a quick look at this for me? Or, even if it's an external team, having that conversation and being able to bring just the basics of, I have found this thing, I think it's this. Like the example you used there, Patrick, I think there is a lot of stuff loading. Do we need to load all of this stuff as soon as somebody clicks on that? Can we use lazy loading? Can we use server-side rendering? Can we use client-side rendering? Or what are the options here? What is your plan? Where is your thought process from a development point of view? I think that's where a lot of the magic happens between SEOs and developers. Like you said, rather than putting the onus on yourself to be like, right, I need to understand this 100% and I need to fully comprehend absolutely everything and read all the documentation, do all the courses, etc., etc. I think understanding enough to be a part of that conversation, for me, has been the key to, bringing value to your clients, bringing value to your colleagues and your partners and the developers as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not really okay to go to a client that there's a problem with JavaScript here. Get on with it. There's just a problem, right? Without any kind of why. Yeah, without any kind of why. And I think you raise a really good point. Part of what I think that I suppose more junior SEOs or people coming into the industry who probably won't know this stuff at the moment. Part of where we need to get to with those sorts of people is giving them the confidence to be able to have those conversations and having those experiences of, essentially sitting down with a developer, like you say, and just going, well, I don't really understand why this is happening, but I think there's some sort of a problem here. This is, this tool showing me this is what I'm seeing. Does this look like a problem to you? Is there any reason that you can see why this might be happening? And having that confidence to just go, look, I don't know enough about this yet to make any kind of a reasonable argument to our client in this situation. Can you help me? And like, it's those experiences that can really give you the confidence to communicate better, but also like feel like you're plugged into the system a bit more and like what's actually happening, right?
Yeah, definitely. The power of saying I don't know rather than waffling a response or just winging it, or the classic it depends SEO answer. Like, I think that is a really powerful thing, and it's definitely something I've kind of gotten better at, hopefully, in my career, of like not kind of just waffling on. And I'm a podcast host, I do waffle, of course, but yeah, the power of I don't know, I think, is really important, and being honest about who can help and where they can help, asking for help, all that kind of stuff is really important. And I found it really interesting that people were honest in the report and in the study, from people saying like, oh yeah, I haven't read the documentation. Because I feel like if you were to ask somebody to their face, say we're at a conference or whatever, and I've got my little microphone and I'm doing my little interviews as I've done at Brighton and a few other places, like, oh, have you read the Google documentation on JavaScript? And they go, yeah, of course I have. Like, yeah, you would just say that to kind of, maybe that's me being pessimistic. Maybe I'm being harsh to the industry, but I feel like a lot of people would just kind of say, yeah, but don't ask me any questions about it.
Yeah. I mean, like the bits as well that there's a couple of the survey results that I think really reflect like where we need more time and resources directed towards is roughly a third of people don't feel comfortable investigating issues in the first place, and again roughly a third don't feel comfortable explaining issues to clients or to stakeholders. Like that they're quite big numbers, right?
Yeah,
that's quite a large percentage of SEOs who are essentially saying, well, I don't really know where to go next with this. Like, I can maybe see there's a problem, but I don't really know how to take the next step. And then again, like, I don't actually really know how I'm supposed to communicate this to the people who need to do something. And if you don't know how to communicate to the people who need to do something, they're not going to do it, right? Like that's like we've spent, there must be countless sort of surveys across the years about like what's the biggest frustration of working as a consultant or in an agency is when you come up with a list of recommendations to your client, part of an SEO report, and they don't get implemented, right? And like, why do things not get implemented is multi-layered, of course. There might not be resource available, etc. But what can we as sort of the working in the agency or consultant side of things do to help improve that is explaining it better. Like, why is this significant in the first place? Like, not only like what might you need to do to fix it, but also why is this actually something that you should care about? And convincing people that the sort of the value of the fix is, or the value of putting time and the resource into doing the fix is worth more than the problem. Well, the problem is costing more, essentially, right? So it's getting that business case, so you can make that business case and go, well, this is a big problem because it's affecting indexing on 5,000 pages, which is going to have an impact into revenue, that right? And actually being able to go, well, if we can solve that problem, then it's going to fix this indexing issue and therefore lead to more revenue. So it's worth the resource. And being able to actually sort of persuade is a key part of being an effective consultant, for sure, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that communication process, getting, like you said, I think so many of us are guilty of this. And again, I will hold my hands up. I always do on this show. I have been guilty of this, where you just like, here is the problem, and you don't actually explain why anybody should care. Why should the client care about it? Why should their boss care about it? Why should the CEO or the C-suite people care about this particular thing? Why would they give a shit that the JavaScript doesn't work? It's like, oh, that means your checkout process doesn't work and you can't process payments. They're like, oh, that's a fundamental thing that is going to affect a lot of us. It's like, by the way, this affects your revenue. Like, right, you need to translate that into the things that are going to matter to those people. And whether that's talking to developers, whether that's talking to clients or stakeholders or whatever it is, I think you're totally right. Having that ability to say the why of why this matters, what it affects, who it affects, and oftentimes how much money are we going to lose or not gain in that process, as is often the case to get those kind of like foot in the door kind of conversations. I think that's really, really important, and something, again, I think a lot of people could be better at. I've seen plenty of presentations, and obviously, SEOs getting together and joking like, oh, I can never get client buy-in. Oh, whenever I send a recommendation, those bloody devs never do anything about it. I'm like, right. Have you told them why it's important? Have you explained, oh, by the way, this affects, we can create all the content in the world, but it's not getting crawled or indexed because of this reason. Could you sort this out, please? By the way, you've left a bunch of no index tags or whatever it is. Like all these kind of things where you could just say no index on page. I'm like, cool. Okay. What does that mean? Like, oh, that means that also the links on those pages are not going to be followed. So you need to worry about that in terms of the crawling and understanding of the whole site. And like, oh, right. Okay. That means when we create new content that's linked to that page, that's also not going to be found by crawlers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you suddenly can then explain it in a bit more detail. And I think you're totally right. Getting that buy-in and the investment understanding is key to explaining that why and why it matters, why people should care. And you're totally right. Like a fact that a third of the respondents were saying that they don't feel comfortable explaining that stuff or even investigating this stuff when it comes to JavaScript, I think is a really kind of scary statistic. Like I'm not massively surprised, to be honest. Like I wouldn't feel hugely comfortable. I would definitely defer to Brendan and Mark, the more senior like technical members of the team here at Canada, to be like, okay, you guys are much better at this stuff than I am. I'll let you kind of, evaluate this or discuss this with the client and that kind of thing.
But that's like the part of the problem as well, like because that's how we end up with this skills gap where there's only a few people who sort of either have ended up, sort of going down a more technical path to get to where they are, or they've deliberately sort of niched down and go, well, I'm going to just learn everything there is to know about this thing, and we end up in a situation where people don't feel that they can actually do this sort of thing. And I think that's where the training has to come in, and it's not just, oh, here's like we can do as many online courses. We are going to be doing an online course, right, about how to do this stuff better. But I also think like in-house training as well that agencies can provide to consultants. We're always talking about agencies in this situation. Obviously, it can be in-house as well, but where it's essentially helping to open up those conversations. I think, like, I really feel like the opaque nature, to go back to that word, of like what is JavaScript actually doing. Like most SEOs aren't going to be, like, best will in the world, they're not going to be able to explain what a certain script is doing, or sometimes why it's doing it, or why it's being loaded in at the point in time that it is. They can make suggestions about, maybe this is something we should look at, but they're not really going to understand why. And trying to loop developers into the conversation, and again, like if this is something that can be done within your relationship with your client, is to say, well, we're going to need access to include your developers in the conversations, then as opposed to sort of going, well, here's a dev tick, here's a Jira ticket, right? Do all these things. Dev's like, well, why, right? If they're involved in the conversation, you can show them the tools, you can show them what you're seeing, you can show them the level of the problem, and work with them to help understand which things might be possible to be done. And it's not just JavaScript. This is exactly the same for performance stuff. If you ever try and do core web vitals, there's always going to be payoffs. Like what is the JavaScript there for in the first place, right? Normally it's either for tracking or it's interactive, some sort of level of interactivity, if it's not literally powering the whole website, right? So there's always going to have to be some sort of a payoff. It's not just get rid of that thing, right? It's like, well, can we load that in? Do we need to load that in on every single page? Can we make it so that, all right, the thing that it's controlling, could some of those elements actually be present in the source HTML as well? And I don't think it's going to be easy to close that gap if we don't start talking interdisciplinarily more. Just made a word up there, right? So, dev teams and developers and SEOs talking to each other much more.
Yeah, definitely. I think interdisciplinary, there I tried it as well. Those kind of conversations I think are really important. And when I first started working at Canada, I was sat next to one of our developers, and I was there for a few months and didn't really, getting through my probation, all that kind of stuff. And there was one day we kind of sat next to each other, like, what do you actually do all day? Like, what's a typical second Wednesday of every month looking like for you as a developer? And they were like, oh, I'm going through a bunch of checking plugins and updating stuff and making sure this is working and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, what happens if there's an emergency or this thing happens? Like, oh, it's all panic stations. We have to go and fix this thing. I'm like, what do you do all day? I'm like, well, that depends. Sometimes I'm writing content. Sometimes I'm running audits. Sometimes I'm using Sitebulb. And that whole conversation, I think, is really key for us to understand the perspective. I think a lot of people talk about it from the SEO side of things, especially during things like migrations and big projects and stuff. You need to get the SEOs involved in that conversation early. And I think you're totally right from the other perspective of bringing the developers into that conversation early as well, and having, again, the interdisciplinary side of things and bringing everybody back together and being like, it doesn't need to be just the marketing people. You can get the developers involved in an early stage. Or if you're on a web project or you're building a new site, migrating a site, whatever it is, bring SEOs in an early conversation so you can then start having those things of, okay, you're going into this with a clear idea of why you're doing this, why this matters. And again, coming back around to that communication with clients and stakeholders, understanding what value it brings to them. Maybe, having a couple of extra hours of meetings and bringing the SEO team in could save you tens of thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever it is of issues later on when you realize you didn't redirect your images. Oh no, what's happening here? We've lost all of our imaging traffic. There's so many little bits and pieces I think can go wrong. And the sooner we have those conversations in projects, in retainers, in whatever it is, whether you're in-house or agency or whatever, I think the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And it even comes down to client onboarding at the beginning, what access are we going to have to resources at your end? If we come back to you with technical problems, how likely is it that they're actually going to get?
What's the resource level like? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And because if you know up front that there's going to be some restrictions, you're less likely, I suppose, to get frustrated further down the line if there are things that you can't do that much about. And I think that's partially what it comes down to as well. We as SEOs can say, or hopefully say at least, this is why this is important from an SEO perspective. This is why we think it needs to be done this way. But we don't necessarily know the flip side. We don't know why a developer or whoever might have built a site in the way that they have, why they've made those decisions, and also what all the things are doing, and what's going on at their end that's made them do it the way that they've done it. And I think part of the problem, and again this goes back to JavaScript being so pervasive and so flexible and versatile, I suppose, is that there's a lot of issues that are being caused kind of in terms of the HTML that developers aren't even aware of. And that's really where the SEO stuff comes in a lot of the time, right? If you are getting these situations where key HTML elements are being changed by JavaScript, and no one really knows that that's happening, or they know that it's happening, but they don't really know which is the right version, right? If you've got an H1 that was saying one thing in the source HTML, and then JavaScript renders a different H1, which is the correct one? Which one did you intend to show?
And which one will Google show on the SERPs as well, right?
Well,
that's a whole other conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and this goes right back to what Elena and Arnout was saying to us back at the end of last year. They were basically saying to us, look, we know that Google's rendering these pages and they're seeing, because we can see the new page title in the SERPs, but then on certain pages, the page title's updated and Google's still showing the old page title in the SERPs. So there's a gap between when the content's changing and when Google are updating it, and that's causing a problem. So what in particular the things that they were wanting to go back to clients with was, we're going to show you all of the pages that are we want to show you all of the pages that are updating these key DOM elements through JavaScript, and we don't want that to happen anymore. All of these things, all of your your meta description, your H1, your page title, your key sort of indexing signals like robots, canonicals, hreflang, structured data. We want all of that stuff to be available inside the source HTML that Google sees initially. Don't update that, or don't change it, or add it with JavaScript. And so that's what we built onto Sitebulb, to allow them to see that, both granularly at a sort of page level. You can see all the individual elements, but then also across the whole website. So you can start to see, well, it's fine on this page, but it's not fine on that page, right? Or which page templates are doing funky things that we need to address. And being able to make that argument for, okay, well, let's adjust this page template and that page template to do what the rest of them are doing. Why? Because we can see that it's got the wrong page title and SERP. So you can take a screenshot and say, look, this is wrong. This shouldn't be like this. Why is it like this? Because you're doing this thing with JavaScript. And again, just kind of closing that gap between what do the tools tell you, and what does it mean for the customer, and what essentially what do they have to do about it. And I don't think you should be getting into individual scripts and what's happening. There will be some technical SEOs who are extremely adept at doing all of those sorts of things, but where I think we need to get to is at least being able to have that first conversation to get to, we can see these problems, they're being caused by JavaScript. The development team need to have a look at how these things are working, and move it away from doing that, because it's causing these sorts of problems.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important, to be able to, as we said a little while ago, have those conversations and be a part of that conversation, at least have the initial step in that direction. And I'll give credit to you guys at Sitebulb as well. I love it when you give your brief explanations in your hints section in after the crawl and after an audit, and then you can go off and link to your resources that give more information and stuff like that. And I found that stuff so useful. Like I said, I am not the most technical SEO. I come from a content background, so me finding something that I don't recognize and then being able to go off and learn about that stuff. And we'll be putting a bunch of resources, the link in the show notes that will take you through to the JavaScript hub that you guys have put together will be full of resources, folks. So you can go and check that out and get knee deep in JavaScript as much as you want to. And I find it really useful for you guys, where you kind of have that little extra explanation of, oh, this is why this is happening. This is probably caused by this thing, or this could be caused by this thing. Rather than, I find so many tools just kind of like, here's the information, off you go, you're on your own. Like just a little brief explanation, a couple of sentences, and then a link off to a wider resource, or a couple of sentences that you can, and then me as an SEO, I can go off and search for, like, what does that actually mean? Oh, I need to go and search that and find that myself. I find that stuff really useful, and that's why we always use Sitebulb here at Candour. I think it's such a, again, not paid, not sponsored, etc., but I think that's why I found it so useful, as even, it's a fairly technical topic we're talking about on this episode, but it's still available for less technical people to get educated and find more resources, and like we said, get up to that level where you can start having those conversations. Because I kind of joked about it earlier, like, oh, there's a chance that the brand new content on the site won't get indexed. Ha ha ha. That's an actual example from a client site that I had a couple of years ago. I wasn't just making that up. And even me being the content writer of side of things, I still need to be aware of how Google is seeing that. You're using the example there of H1s and page titles being changed and stuff, like seeing something different in the HTML that you might see through a Chrome extension or a browser extension or whatever using, and then actually seeing what's on the SERP, like, why is that different? Being able to understand where that comes from and why it's there is such a powerful conversation. Even if, not to disparage, but if you're just doing content, that's still a relevant idea to have, because that could come in a content order. That could be a part of that discussion. You might get a message from your client or stakeholder being like, hey, when I saw an article the other day, and again, real example, I'm not making this up, I saw this page title. How come the title was different on the thing? It's like, oh yeah, Google, Google changes titles, Google changes meta descriptions, ha ha ha. Turns out it wasn't that. Turns out it was a JavaScript thing, and we were worrying about it because their site was, I think it was Squarespace, and Squarespace is notorious for changing page titles, and we'd experienced it where we changed one page title on like the blog listing page, and it changed all of the other content titles to the same thing. So it was like blog 1, blog 2, blog 3, blog 4, rather than the actual page titles, and we had a little bit of a heart attack, and that was fun.
I like just to bring that back to the report again. Like, you know, one of the most interesting bits that I find is that graph that just shows you the change over time of, you know, HTML sort of the HTML crawler dwindling versus the Chrome crawler increasing over time, and that does show you that SEOs are taking rendering much more seriously. Like, it's become the de facto. Well, we know that Google is rendering pages when they're crawling the websites. So we also need to do that as well. We need to make sure that the data we're using to make decisions is the same data that they're using to make indexing decisions. So, you know, I think that's a really good reflection that things are moving in the right direction. And like the thing that you just mentioned there with that issue again, like, it is so easy to just sort of go, you know, Google know what they're doing. They rewrite their meta descriptions and stuff like that. And like, that's why it's important that you also audit this stuff as well, and you make sure that you're including those things in your checks, because that sort of thing will get flagged by Sitebulb, or Screaming Frog does it as well, right? Where they'll say, okay, this has been changed. This has been changed by JavaScript. Do you want this to happen, right? Like, and that's the other thing. Like, is this intentional? Was this completely unintentional? Is this a rogue plugin that nobody knew about? Or like, you know, sometimes WordPress sites, or whatever, like, they've got multiple plugins that are all doing the same thing. Like,
oh God, yeah.
And another one does it again, right? You've got 9 canonicals on the page all of a sudden, right? Like, do you mean to do any of these things, or is this how it was designed, right?
Yeah, I think the record for me was 67 active WordPress plugins on a client site at one point, 3 of which were doing analytics, which was fun. There was like Monster Insights and the it was Universal at the time, Universal Analytics for WordPress, and some other thing as well. I'm like, you know, you have 3 different G tags going on, and you're tracking 2 of them, but I don't know what's going on here. Somebody's added one by tag manager. It's all chaos. And yeah, I think that's a really good way of kind of, like you said, bringing everything back around together and understanding the growth that we've seen in the web and in the internet. And again, I joked about like how much technology has changed and stuff. Like you said, JavaScript isn't just websites. It's apps. It's games. It's everything we're using now. Your phone is full of this kind of stuff. And understanding that stuff can be really interesting if you're a nerd like me. you want to dig into that kind of stuff, and it can be really useful for understanding, like we said, conversations with clients, stakeholders, developers, all that kind of stuff. And there is plenty more information and data and insights from Sam, Arnaut, Aleda, and everybody else, and yourself, Patrick, in the report, which you can go and read. Like I said, link in the show notes. Go and check that out, listeners and viewers. I highly recommend go and check it out. It has launched today, so now is the time to read it. Join the conversation. Plenty of people will be chatting about it on social media and stuff. Speaking of social media, Patrick, and websites and all that kind of stuff, where can people follow you, Sitebulb, find the report, all that good stuff across the now JavaScript-powered internet that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Hathaway P. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Patrick Hathaway, I think it's just my LinkedIn name. Pretty sure I managed to get like the original one there. Yeah, and you know, we're at Sitebulb on both of those platforms as well. They're our 2 main platforms that we sort of engage. In terms of the JavaScript report itself, again, you put the link in the show notes, but it's sitebulb.com /JavaScript-SEO. And so there's a few things you'll find on there. That's kind of a collection of all of our JavaScript SEO resources. You'll get access to that webinar we're referencing, obviously the report that we've been talking about, but also you can sign up for an upcoming training that's launching in about a month's time at the start of September. It's being run by Sam Torres and Tori Gray from Gray.company, who are working with us in conjunction with our partnership with Women in Tech SEO. So there'll be a free course for everybody to sign up to there, which will help deal with some of the issues that we've talked about today, that you see in the report, helping to kind of close this gap and helping people to understand what they're looking at, how to audit sites with JavaScript. And then the crucial part, I think, I would say the most crucial part is how to actually go ahead and communicate these things as well. So if you go on that URL, you can do all of these things. You can look at the report, you can sign up for that course, which you'll get notified of in about a month's time.
Amazing. Huge shout out to Sam and Tori as well. They're the best. I love opinionated SEO opinions. I love what the Grey guys are doing. They're absolutely fantastic. Hopefully, I've had a couple of conversations. We'll have a podcast crossover with them at some point in the future. Fingers crossed. But thank you so much for joining me, Patrick. It's been a real pleasure digging into the report, picking some ideas and going off on a few tangents here and there. And it's been a really, really fun conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me again 4 years later.
And that concludes another episode of Search with Candour. Thank you so much for watching or listening, wherever you're watching or listening, viewer or listener. And huge thank you to Patrick for rejoining me after 4 years, all the way back during the pandemic days of 2020, now coming back in 2024 to discuss all the details of JavaScript SEO stuff. I know I've said it a couple of times already, but I do say go and check out the links. Everything, including our sponsors, all the links, all the resources and stuff like that Patrick and I discuss throughout the episode. You can find it all down below. I'll put the link for the actual report just below me here. That'll flash across the screen because I'll edit it in. And you can go and check out the show notes or the video description and actually click on the link there as well and go straight there. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Like I said, I really, really appreciate the support we've seen throughout Season 3. If you would like to sponsor the show, we have plenty of slots available coming up later on in the year as well. I have some amazing new sponsors coming up very soon, which I'm very, very excited to work with, and loads of other fantastic stuff coming up. If you want to keep up with all the usual stuff, please do subscribe, like, and all the usual YouTube stuff, basically. Help promote Search with Candour on YouTube. If you have any questions for me or Patrick, leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll get Patrick and me to reply to you and answer any questions you have. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a 5-star review. If you really enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it. Let me know that you enjoyed this episode. There's even a little comment section on Spotify now where you can comment and let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, all that kind of stuff. So, multitude of ways to give us feedback here at Search with Candour. And I'm always looking to take on that feedback and action it and all that kind of stuff. And for next week's guest, the one and only Juliana Turnbull will be joining me on next week's episode. And this has been a very long time in the making. Joe and I have been having this conversation for a very long time, trying to organize something. Joe and I will be talking all about how to basically create industry events, why industry events are important, and how to build and grow communities around industry events. It's something I am very active in. I'm helping run Search Norwich here in Norwich with Mark. I'm also a founder of the Neurodivergent in SEO community as well. And community and events has been a big part of my SEO career so far. So it's something I'm very passionate about, and it's something Joe has been doing for like 10 years longer than me and knows a lot more about it than I do. So there is a lot of fantastic advice. If you're looking to attend events, if you're looking to run your own events, if you're looking to build your own community or join and find new communities, it's going to be a fantastic resource for all that kind of stuff coming up in next week's episode. Until then, thank you once again for watching or listening, and I'll see you next week.